The alien commander stood upright, his gaze glancing over the basic, unassuming training ground before him, and scoffed. In contempt, this is Earth's military instruction, his voice heavy with contempt for him. His officials nodded in unison, their forms mirroring the same haughtiness they exhibit. This was a jokey show in comparison to the large, highly powerful military systems they commanded. Earth's underdevelopment techniques were under observation. The teacher, a calm man in his late 40s, stood off to the side, watching the interaction. He was dressed clearly, merging into the backdrop, as he always did. He not try to protect the facility or respond to the commander's comments, stayed impartial, nearly distanced the commander, swiftly dismiss him as irrelevant, sparing him a glance. This all you have? The commander, slinking slowly with hands clenched behind his back. I have seen children's playgrounds more remarkable than this. How would you expect to equip troops fit for survival? In actual combat, his inquiry was rhetorical. He didn't give a damn about an answer. He already believed that Earth was no threat, and that their armies were only glorified amateurs. Playing at war, the teacher stated nothing he didn't need his pupils dispersed with. Around the building, discreetly doing their training exercises, their motions were methodical and exact. Concentrated, yet kept a nonchalant attitude, as if this were just another regular day for the untrained. Though their teacher's eyes were ordinary, there was something under the surface that only those who really knew war would naturally see. The commander, of course, not see. His eyes stayed on the surface elements, the old-fashioned weapons, the basic training equipment. He laughed again, shaking his head. We should continue. I have seen enough. Nothing here worth my time. The teacher just changed his cool look. You haven't seen anything yet. Resting on the commander for a short period, he stated gently, but his voice had enough weight that the commander stopped for a while. It was not a challenge or a boast, was a factual statement. The commander arched an eyebrow, but rapidly waved his hand dismissively. I don't need more this kind of instruction. He gestured vaguely beneath us, at the soldiers doing drills. My men may wipe you out. Your time is being wasted in seconds. His statements were cutting, but there was no animosity. He simply didn't see human presence or their teaching techniques as a major influence on galactic warfare. The teacher's face didn't alter inwardly. He realized the commander was gravely misreading. The years of training, discipline, and experience had not equaled what troops under his direction seemed to be, molded them into elite warriors unparalleled in their abilities and tactics. Yet he wasn't suited for arguing. Had discovered long ago that the best strength was not in noisy announcements or flimsy demonstrations. It was in calm preparation, in the slow, painstaking refining of one's capacities. The calm commander turned his back precisely, leaving his cops behind, still laughing as he walked away. Their words were quiet, but the teacher watched them go and narrowed somewhat from scorn. He had met their kind before, haughty, contemptuous, too dependent on their technology and superior numbers all around. Did the same error, and finally one of the teachers approached him, a young Sawyer, to pay the consequences. He questioned with keen eyes and a quiet earnestness they do not understand. Keeping his voice low, the teacher shook his head gently. They never do. Not. The pupil looked at the alien commander's withdrawing figures and his entourage until it was too late. Believe they will confront us, so we should endeavor to prove their supremacy by battering, answered his voice cool, or they would go persuaded they had nothing to offer. Either way, it doesn't matter. We are ready. They are. The student nodded. For a little smile playing at the margins of his mouth will never be visible. The teacher did not smile, but his eyes showed a silent gratification. No, they wouldn't. The discussion stopped there, as it usually did. The teacher turned his returning to the training fields, where his troops were still practicing. To an outsider, it was a spectacle of daily grind of common soldiers performing their duties. Nevertheless, the instructor understood better. Every movement, every action was part of a well-considered plan meant to challenge these troops outside their comfort zone, to equip them for combat that would challenge them in ways few could have predicted, and when the time came, these troops would be ready. The alien commander might have written them off as weak and unimportant, but he would find the truth shortly enough on Earth. Warriors were the deadliest in the galaxy, taught by the finest, honed by experience, not only soldiers. Knowledge that went much beyond what the commander could grasp. The teacher, for his part, stayed mute. His strength was in his capacity to remain unseen till the very last, hence his role was not to seek validation or acknowledgement. Moment was perfect. The alien commander had erred in undervaluating him, just as so many others have before, but ultimately the outcomes would speak for themselves. Since the day drew to close, the alien commander spacecraft launched off into the wild. The troops were still in training. Their steady and under control movement pattern helped the trainer. Observed them, his eyes reflective, knowing that the commander's hubris was only beginning. would guide him to make decisions that would allow him to personally experience the actual strength of Earth when that time came there. Knowing this better than anyone else, there would be no turning back, the teacher knew. Having seen it all before the alien commander arrived, still sporting that air of superiority, his conceit had not diminished. In reality, it seemed to have grown overnight. His footfall resonated across the institution. His eyes were glancing across once more. He waved contemptuously at the drills. Being still, what you refer to as training, said with a grin. The teacher stood close by, arms crossed. Seeing silently, his demeanor revealed nothing. Nevertheless, he was seeing every movement, every response from the leader. The soldiers carried on their drills, disregarding their presence. Alien viewers concentrated on the current chores. The commander gestured to one of his subordinates, demonstrate them actual combat, using a tall extraterrestrial with a keen eye. Commanding the subordinate, the trainer nodded and moved onward. Calling out to a small squad of alien troops accompanying them, they swiftly aligned their shining armor. Their weapons hummed with vitality beneath the sunlight, meant to scare, but the Earth soldiers stayed disciplined and attentive throughout their drills, not flinching. This was both excellent and terrifying. The commander observed the troops of Earth for a time before turning to the teacher. Let's make this interesting, he whispered. A wicked smile creeping over his face. Your troops against my friendly rivalry to demonstrate your actual relative behindness. The teacher's expression stayed neutral. He nodded slightly to his soldiers, who are now on attention, waiting for his reply. Indicating his approval. If that is what you desire, he answered coolly. There was no hesitancy in his voice. He talked with the subdued assurance of the alien commander's smile grew visibly delighted with man who understood exactly what was about to happen. Great, he replied. Let's see whether your so-called troops can match actual warriors. The challenge put the aliens against Earth troops in a mock fight. The commander was sure his forces would prevail, knowing their advanced weaponry and technology will provide. He was unaware of an almost impossible advantage. Earth's troops had been taught to think beyond technology, depending on instinct and strategic ability. Started the simulation. The alien warriors engaged in a planned attack, expected moved with accuracy and flashing weaponry. The Earthmen to fall under the strain of the stronger firepower, but did not. But the soldiers of Earth answered with a degree of discipline and coordination that took the aliens by surprise. Surprisingly, they moved as a group, adjusting to the terrain, using their surroundings to their benefit, while the alien soldiers from technology Earth showed a strong awareness of tactical warfare, while those from brute force depended on they were most critically erratic and patient. Exact every movement they made appeared deliberate, as if they were always 3 steps ahead of their rival team. The commander, observing from the sidelines, scowled at seeing the battle was not proceeding as he had anticipated. Despite their advanced weaponry, soldiers were finding it difficult to land a clear blow. Every time the aliens believed they had them trapped, the Earth's troops were too swift, too organized, and every time people would vanish from unexpected locations to exact terrible accuracy in rebuffing the extraterrestrial. Soldiers, annoyed, started to lose control. Their attacks grew more forceful and frantic, yet it only made things worse. The Earth troops profited on every error, destroying their opponent. The alien warriors, with surgical precision, one by one, collapsed, overpowered by superior tactics and expertise rather than by superior technology. It was not surprising to the teacher, as he observed the fight using the same composed demeanor he normally adopted. He knew what. Having been taught for just this kind of situation to outsmart and outmaneuver an enemy, his forces were able to opponent who, after the last alien soldier was put down, leaned excessively on their technology and strength. The battlefield became silent. The soldiers of the Earth stood erect with emotions incomprehensible as they waited for more. On the other hand, the clearly disturbed alien commander looked at the scene before him, his troops straining to understand what had just happened. A gang of people using nothing more than antiquated weaponry and simple strategy had defeated elite warriors. He turned to the teacher, his face mask of incredulity. How he started, but the words stuck in his throat. He had no idea what to say. This was not how it was meant to go. Though in his perspective humans were feeble, unable of resisting the might of an advanced alien force, and yet here they were triumphant. The teacher met his eyes. His attitude stayed the same. It is not necessarily concerning the weaponry, he mentioned silently, rather. It's about the soldiers' actions. Consider how they cooperate. This is what drives wars to be successful. Commander's pride stung by the simple truth in the teacher's remarks he neglected stiffened his jaw. His eyes showed obvious wrath. He had undervalued them, and now for the first time he was starting to realize exactly how great a mistake without another word had been. Commander turned and silently walked away, his troops behind him. Although the fight was finished, something informed the instructor that the commander was not the kind to accept. Defeat readily, there would be more hurdles, more testing, but that wouldn't matter. The teacher knew his troops were ready for whatever came next, as once more, an extraterrestrial ship vanished into the heavens. The Earth troops returned to their training and moved as exact and orderly as always. They had won the war, but their attention stayed constant since they knew better. Then to become lazy, this was only the beginning. The teacher studied them for a bit, then turned and headed back. The commander might have learned the lesson today near the training ground, but he hadn't learned the whole degree of what Earth's forces were able to accomplish. Not yet, but shortly enough he would. The alien commander, not ready despite first astonishment. He couldn't believe that these people were primitive in his view, so he could admit loss. Had outwitted his best troops there, and his conceit had to have an explanation that he had missed. He persuaded himself that the people had just happened to be lucky. He wouldn't let this small detail go unpackled when he returned with it this time. New strategy would not only be a pleasant simulation, he desired a real test, one that would unequivocally show his forces to be superior. Teacher, as usual, did not object. He agreed without question and said quiet, as though the commander misinterpreted this assurance for ignorance. The regulations were already obvious to him. Simple Earth troops against the aliens, but this time in a live battle simulation instead of more practice rounds. The commander reassured his soldiers that once the actual stakes were on the line, his army would not have any chance. Had been ready for everything after all, or so he thought of as the fighting. As the alien troops charged in with their customary force and accuracy depending on their superior technology to provide, they moved swiftly, their weapons blazing confidence at this moment. An advantage. Triumph was guaranteed. They have changed their strategies to consider the human unexpected quickness and clever, but the people had adapted. The armies of the Earth did not only react, moving across the battlefield with a fluidity that suggested they knew, they expected the attack. Exactly what every alien movement was greeted with was a counter the humans seemed to find almost simple. Weren't merely responding, they were directing the battle's flow, dragging the alien forces into traps they lacked knowledge of. Ever understand were there until it was too late. The instructor preparation had ingrained in them the need of strategy, of knowing the enemy's perspective. These troops knew how to think like their opponent and predict their every maneuver, and more especially how to take advantage of their shortcomings. The alien commander, it was not a fluke the humans were winning. Observing from the sidelines started to cause anxiety. Once more by superior thought and execution rather than just chance. Like the battle wore on the alien troops, and their attacks got increasingly furious. Disorganized, they had not received instruction on handling an opponent fighting like this. Their reliance on technology had made them lazy, expecting their tools to do the work for them. But Earth's troops had twisted the very landscape into a weapon, exploiting every rock, every shadow to their use. Frustrated, the commander, by moving like ghosts, striking quickly and vanishes before the aliens could respond. Increased with every minute, he struggled to comprehend how this was occurring. His forces were expected to be invincible, yet here they were fighting against troops employing what he considered to be antiquated methods and inferior techniques. His rage surged up as he watched his elite soldiers drop one by one, unable to match the relentless attack from the Earth troops. But it wasn't only their fighting ability that were superior, their degree of discipline and unity matched those of the alien troops. They worked their motions as one unit, were exactly timed, as though they possessed one consciousness. Every action had every choice taken with a larger picture in mind, was not only meant for winning but also for dominates. To clear any question about their superiority, the alien commander's pride would have let him down even as he pushed his forces harder, expecting more from them even as they persisted. Once assured and boastful, his troops were clearly terrified. The combat had suffered, and they no longer moved with the same accuracy. Their formerly flawless forms were now shattered by their strikes were erratic, whereas the troops of Earth stayed composed and targeted, and deadly effective. In the end, the aliens were not even near totally defeated their army in chaos, as the Earth soldiers stood victorious, just barely winded from the battle. The remains of the alien commander's pride were scattered over the battlefield, once invincible troops now deleted to defeated warriors. The commander realized it was a humiliating loss. He peered at the picture before him in incredulity. His whole perspective had been, because all he learned about warfare regarding superiority had been proved mistaken. In a few hours, these people he had earlier taken under observation had surpassed him at. Every time the teacher turned his look to be as calm as always, he lacked gloat, didn't show. He just watched as the alien commander battled to find the words. You undervalued us, the teacher added silently. That was your first error. The commander stared at him, his eyes glistened with a mix of wrath and uncertainty. How did you do this? His voice changed from arrogance to real incredulity. He needed to grasp how his forces had been so utterly outmatched to the teacher we taught to consider. It's not about who has the best, rather, it's about fighting to understand our enemy so we may adapt it. Weapons, or the most developed technologies, it's about who can use what they have most efficiently. That's why you lost. The remark stung, but the commander knew they were accurate. He had been overly preoccupied with his own dominance, too blinded by his dependency on technology to observe the actual human strength before him, and now he had paid the price for his conceit. Meant he said nothing else. His silence left nothing to say. Soldiers were defeated, their pride was broken. The humans had shown their value in the most forceful manner imaginable. When the teacher watched them go, his countenance unreadable. He could not dispute it as the alien powers withdrew. This was before the ascent and descent of those believing they to be unbeatable. And he knew deep down that although for now Earth soldiers had shown their worth, this was not the last time they would be tested. Strength not only to the alien commander but also to the whole galaxy the war was fought in. But the lesson had been acquired. Earth was not to be undervalued. The alien commander, his pride damaged and his forces embarrassed, could not let this loss go unpackled. In his opinion, this had become personal and was no more about a basic test of strength. He was driven to demonstrate Galaxy Earth was not as strong as it seemed. Thus the concept of being surpassed seemed humans beings formerly thought lowly gnawed at him. He would not return. He had to prove that his soldiers were still the leaders of his empire, despite the guilt over such a loss. Dominant force this time would not have any safety measures or simulation. Alien commander chose to intensify the matter outside of a controlled setting, genuine combat with all its consequences. The only way he thought he could restore his lost respect the commander approached was through hazards and repercussions. Teacher, once more his attitude was colder than before. He lacked comedy in his eyes. No, his voice was arrogant. Dead serious this time. It would be real. No, not flinching at the teacher, as always stayed calm. He held back. His answer was measured in his voice even. If that's what you desire, he realized his only response would be calm resolution devoid of fear. Soldiers were ready. They had been prepared for real war, not only for drills. And while the alien commander might have considered this as a last-ditch attempt to preserve face, the teacher realized this was really another exam for his troops. They had encountered better and would encounter it once again. The alien commander handed his troops, equipped with their whole arsenal, the command this time into. The environment was tense. The alien warriors were still strong, but now carried the weight of their past loss on their shoulders. They were less confident now than they had been. To involve uncertainty that had crept into their brains and shown in their motions, their once stiff forms now reflected doubt. On the opposite side, Earth soldiers were getting ready. Did so quietly and effectively without fanfare. There was no boasting, no outward displaying hostility. They just checked their weapons, then went into formation exactly as they had taught to treat an outsider. They might have seemed normal, but under that cal facade was a lethal concentration, ready to act with the precision hammered into they by the instructor. The extraterrestrial forces first used their advanced weapon, ignited, deafening the air, cracking as he raised waves of energy toward the humans across the battlefield. With the force of the attack, the Earth soldiers moved with practiced speed, using the terrain to their advantage, dragging and weaving through the onslaught with an almost unearthly grace. Their motions weren't merely reactions aimed to bring the alien forces into exposed places. The aliens pushed ahead, attempting to overwhelm the humans with just firepower. However, regardless of force level, they applied the troops of the Earth, always one step ahead, using their surroundings with a mastery that while the humans, depending on raw power and technological superiority, alien forces could not compete, depended on flexibility in interpreting the flow of war and modifying behavior. Every attack the aliens started was greeted with a counter, every advance thwarted by a planned retreat or ambush led. As the war dragged on, it became evident that the men of Earth were not just holding their terrain, they were acquiring the upper hand. The alien soldiers, despite their advanced weapons, started to fail their cohesiveness. And as frustration set in, they were educated to overwhelm, to dominate, not to outthink an enemy who practiced this type of warfare. Battled with such relentless accuracy, the alien commander stared in terror as his troops disintegrated. This was not only a defeat, it was a disassembly of his forces, formerly regarded as the best. An enemy he had blatantly was methodically outmaneuvering and destroying warriors in the galaxy. Oversaw a full assault, seeking to crush the humans with sheer numbers, but undervalued. His confidence shattered. But it was too late. The Earth warriors, under complete control, now moved, using every vulnerability, every crack in the alien. They precisely finished the battle. Force's armor they battled with. Instead of depending on overpowering force, it was a masterclass. deadly efficiency, each hit deliberate to inflict most damage with minimal effort. In warfare, a demonstration of ability that unequivocally identified the superior fighters, the extraterrestrial forces now had disarray withdrew under the commander's dire commands. What had begun as the commander observing his troops escape felt the weight of attempt to recover honor had become a crushing defeat. His pride had been damaged, hence his failure settled over him like a heavy mantle. There was no recovery from this. Annihilated not by a greater force, but by a troop fighting under disciplined intelligence and with knowledge of combat much above his own that his tutor saw from the brink of the battlefield. The withdrawing aliens understood this was the same calm he had worn throughout. There would be no more difficulty since the commander had pushed his army to their capacity and broken there. The lesson had been given, and the alien commander had discovered it the hard way now. The dust settled. The teacher turned to his silent but unreadable warriors. Their posture revealed mountains of information. Performed their duties and did it well. Celebration was not necessary there. Need for words they knew they were capable of. Now so did their adversaries. Once so confident and sure of his dominance, the alien commander departed the battlefield silently, unable. Even he finds himself staring at the teacher as he passed. There was nothing to say. The humans had demonstrated something that no amount of firepower or technology could offset. True power came from the warriors who carried weapons for the teacher, not from any weapon. Just another day he had groomed his troops for the day they would be undervalued for this precise moment. Ignored and discounted, and now when the alien powers withdrew, he recognized that the galaxy would never repeat that error. Earth's troops had shown themselves not only as warriors but also as the deadliest force the galaxy had ever known, and they had accomplished under the direction of a teacher who knew that the best victories came from strategic discipline and a strong knowledge of rather than from brute force. The enemy, the war was over, and Earth stood victorious following it. Left the alien leader in a state of incredulity he had never simply lost, had utterly outclassed his warriors. His elite forces lacked the Earth's warriors who had battled with a passion and accuracy that surpassed his comprehension. He had never dreamed of. Never people with their crude technology could overcome an army like his, but today having to face the reality of his failure among the ruins of his once proud soldiers, he had no option but teacher, though, gave no indication of pride or victory. He stayed cool and composed, as he had been all through the struggle. To him, this was about demonstrating and not about winning or losing it. His troops were ready for anything, not because of their gear but rather because of they were the living example of what he had taught, disciplined in their knowledge of war. They had then shown the galaxy what they were capable of, and now the alien commander, still battling with the scope of his loss, neared the teacher one last time. His former haughtiness turned to his attitude had been replaced with a quiet resignation. His voice lacked any swagger. Merely the weight of I discovered too late. I undervalued the commander's subdued voice. Almost mortified, I realized we were not superior in any one aspect. The teacher stared at him, his countenance unaltered. You depended on your technology. Regarding your figures, he said, his tone even, but you overlooked the fact that wars cannot be won by robots. People battle them. The commander nodded gently, his eyes far off. His empire had always prided itself on believing that scientific supremacy was all that counted throughout his whole tenure. On its developments in pure force's capacity to overwhelm adversaries, but here on Earth he had seen something different, something he had not equipped these troops educated under for. Teacher battled with a degree of knowledge and ability far above what any computer could offer for a protracted period. Time either spoke. The battlefield surrounding them was calm now. The stress from the battle struggle, having receded into the alien commander, was no more the confident, a weighty stillness. Figure he had when he first arrived his defeat had humbled him in a way never possible with words. Ever could you train them well. When the commander at last broke the quiet, his voice suddenly carried a touch of respect, something that had been lacking lately. Missing before he had personally experienced what the teacher's strategies could generate, and he could no longer refute their potency. The teacher nodded slightly, guiding their self-training. I only showing them the route. The commander scowled, uncertain of what to make of the teacher modesty, but he didn't probe. He knew enough to recognize that this man's power stemmed from not looking for accolades, but from instructing his warriors to battle with more than just knowledge of combat of the mind and spirit, and from a deep awareness of just their guns. The leader turned back at the remains of his army, his shoulders slung with the weight of his defeat. He knew that following this his empire would be in ruins, hence his reputation would be in ruins. Demand responses, and would have to deal with the fallout from his failing effort, but more Then he would carry with him the awareness that he had been defeated by a force he had previously thought about minor. "I'll depart," the commander stated at last. "There is nothing more to be done here. You have won." The teacher's non-response. He did not need to fight this battle. Spoken for itself. The alien commander turned away to indicate his surviving as the troops started their withdrawal. The teacher watched them go, countenance remaining inscrutable. His men stood close, their expressions steady and quiet. They had battled valiantly, yet their efforts went without celebration or encouragement. What they were taught to accomplish was sufficient victory for them. It was survival, not about glory. Proving themselves able in the face of overwhelming odds as the extraterrestrial ships soared out into the heavens. Teacher turned to his well-done troops and remarked, simply expressed. His comments were short, but they carried the weight of great respect. These men and women had developed under his direction for years, sharpening their abilities, learning the art of war, and thereafter displayed the galaxy that Earth was not a planet to be taken lightly. The soldiers nodded silently, appreciating his compliments, knowing that this triumph was equally theirs, as every exercise they had gone through had readied them for every lesson he had taught them. This was the time they had stood against a force meant to have crushed them, and they had come out triumphant not because of their weaponry, but because of their discipline, their solidarity, and their determination. The teacher glanced back to the horizon, observing the last of the alien ships disappear from view, aware that this would be the galaxy was large and many people still undervalued Earth's last experience under threat like this. Humanity, but the word of Earth's not to be disregarded, would spread after today. Among the deadliest in the galaxy, taught by a teacher aware that war was as such, were the dismissed troops, much regarding the mind as it was regarding the body. As the sun started to drop long shadows across the training area, the teacher remained silent while his mind already focused on the next difficulty. He understood that the aliens would come back one day, maybe not under this commander. Even this empire, someone somewhere would return to test Earth power, and upon their arrival would discover that the troops under his command were exactly as they had been instructed. Today, victory was only another turn on the road the galaxy would be on. It was not the end. Had discovered today, but the teacher recognized that learning will always be more important for preparation, and as long as he was there to mentor Earth soldiers, their talents sharpened, their mentality will remain ready. Though the conflict was far from ended, warfare was over, and the instructor and the soldiers he oversaw had trained would be waiting, always ready for whatever came first. Next.